Yeah. All right, it's Wednesday, guys, which means that we've got a case study to talk about. So before we do that, a few announcements. So just a reminder, your presentations in the semester, start thinking about the topics. I've already had one group select a topic. It's a pretty interesting topic. It's casino cybersecurity. I can only assume that that's relevant because you guys spend a lot of time at casinos, over and just are very concerned that your winnings are going to be threatened. No, I was actually talking to some students, some people in this room outside of my office, and I was saying that during my PhD program, on the weekends when I was reading papers, I was actually playing poker because I could not just read papers in my office and say, "Oh, this is great," So yeah, little dirty secret. I'm a degenerate gambler. Okay, maybe not degenerate, but there you go. So yeah, please start thinking about some other topics that your group will present about. Yeah, let me know what those are. Let's get those resolved ASAP. And also remember that you might want to consider about when you're going to present. There were 3 presentation dates, I believe, and so you might want to reach out and talk to your group about what would be work best for everybody. If there's like a specific date that somebody in your group absolutely has to present on, you probably want to resolve that earlier. This has actually happened in past semesters where I had student athletes that could not present on specific days because they were gone during like the last week of the semester. So they had to, they didn't let me know till like right before that week. And I was like, you knew you were going to be gone this day. Why didn't you just tell me? And then I would have put your group on that date, and just worked out. So I'm normally really pretty positive on student athletes, so I apologize. I don't want to defame anybody because I know there's a lot of you in this room. Actually, everybody, all but one of you, I'm just really, really optimistic about. There's one of you that I'm just really, really pessimistic about. I'm not going to mention any names. Okay, now you guys are wondering who is it. It's none of you. It's none of you. I just wanted to screw with you. Also, for those of you like hanging out by my office, which apparently is several of you based on yesterday's afternoon's powwow, I will not have office hours today from 12:30 to 1:20. I actually have a presentation that I have to go give. So if you were planning on repeating the activity this afternoon, make sure it's late afternoon after my audit class. I'm assuming most of you are just going to go home and probably sit on your bed for an hour and do nothing. But I'm sorry, I couldn't resist saying that. Yeah, if you're planning on coming by, please make sure that I won't be there for the first set of office hours. All right. So target data breach is an interesting case, and I noticed that on Monday that you all were really enthusiastic about it. In fact, I can only assume that since it took some of the groups like 12 minutes to complete before they left the class, that they read the case in such detail. They were like, I love this so much that I'm going to answer the questions now. And it's going to be a formality class, which is fine, okay? And it's great because I have very detailed questions about the case that I'm going to ask the group leaders, okay? More than the ones that are based on this list, okay? Because again, you group leaders are responsible for knowing so much information about the case. So I'm assuming that you read it in super detail and know a ton of information about it. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, okay? Thank you very much for your diligent and hard work in that regard. And if you let me down, woe betide you, all right? It'll be Halloween repeat all over again. So normally what I do at this point is I will walk through the case and I just kind of talk about some of the high points of the case. But like I said, I noticed that people were leaving early, which again means that you did all your work outside of class. So let's go ahead and hear it from the group leaders and hear what was going on in this case. So we'll start with Jacob. Tell me a little bit about Target. What was the nature of that organization?
Target, well, they are a grocery store that sells, or they started off as a grocery store. They're also like a home goods store.
Yeah, so pretty well known retailer.
Right. And do you want to know like in regards to this?
Just a little bit about the company profile.
They're traded on the S&P 500.
What would you say about the size of the organization? Small. Yeah, pretty massive. Yeah, one of the I think that I don't know what the percentage would be or what the range would be, but they're definitely a well-recognized retailer. We think of retail goods stores; they're definitely on the tip of our tongue. Probably Walmart is the most well-known, but Target's not far off there. In fact, Yeah, so I think they're 1 and 2, and Target considers itself a direct competitor of Walmart, which Walmart's probably just in the background saying, "Yeah, of course you are." Yeah, the size is pretty substantially different, but Target is still pretty impressive. All right, and yeah, a little bit of background. Where did they get the start? Did you guys catch that? Minnesota, Roseville, Minnesota. Yeah, that's a weird place for some place to so massive to start. I say that like they would just arbitrarily start in some place that everybody starts at. There's people or the big companies start out somewhere and they just expand. So I don't know what that statement is about. All right. So yeah, and then this case was a little bit about some cybersecurity concerns that were going on. What happened here? So before we get to the data breach itself, let's talk a little bit about what their environment looked like prior to this breach. Jackson, what did you and your group observe about the nature of this organization with respect to their controls, their IT controls, and their cybersecurity protocols?
Yeah, I think they had a decent control environment, but they had certain weak controls, which led to the data breach.
Okay, so if I were to characterize their governance and their overall applicability to controls framework, would you say if you were to do this, would you say it was strong? Would you say that generally strong, or would you say it was generally weak?
I kind of put in the middle.
In the middle. So I think that the first part of this, when they start talking about the nature of the organization, we will definitely talk about some concerns that we have about the organization as a whole. But just characterized before the breach, they said, well, they appear to be following all the best practices they're supposed to be following. And again, I gave them a lot of grief when we were talking about TJX. Said, yeah, Target didn't learn from that mistakes, but it appears that some of the things that were direct results of the TJX breach, Target took very seriously. They talked about the payment card industry standards, and they were following those standards. Now, the question that we're going to run into is, were those standards sufficient? And it actually led to a very big change that you all are somewhat familiar with nowadays. So this was not necessarily Target not doing what it was supposed to do, but what they were supposed to do, was that enough? It was a big question. And so if they were just a standalone entity, do we think that this data breach would have happened? Maybe, but probably not to the scale that it did. All right. So that being the case, Derek, tell me a little bit about the origin of the breach.
From what I understand, it initiated from the third party Fazio Mechanical Services, and that their standards, like they said, their standards were or their security system was up to standard, but it actually wasn't the truth. So the hackers were able to get passwords from their server to access Target's server, I guess.
So basically, this is a third party that actually had access Target systems, which we'll talk about that because that's very relevant to something we've already talked about in this course. As a result, Target systems were compromised. They said that through the access that Fazio had, they were able to escalate their privilege, which basically means they started out one level and they were able to gradually make their way into much higher levels within the system itself. So you all remember NetSuite from AIS? So think about where you all operated in NetSuite. You all operated at administrator privileges. Is that the way that most system users would actually operate? No. So escalation would basically be that you'd be at one lower level and that you manage to work your way up to a higher level. If you're an administrator, you have access to everything. You can access to do everything just like you did in NetSuite. But in the real world, you would not have access to every single one of those program tools. It would be limited based on your role. And then let's see, Savannah, can you tell me a little bit about the time frame for the data breach? I guess, sorry, hold on. I'm going to take you off mute because somebody keeps muting this, even though I keep trying to unmute it. All right. Try again.
So on November 30th, I believe, was when the security personnel actually alerted them that there was a malware detection. But Target actually didn't take any steps after they were told, and they actually waited until they were contacted by the Department of Justice to actually start investigating to see what happened.
All right. So basically, there was an incident that occurred on November 30th. I think it was reported to the center, the tech center in Bangalore. I believe that was correct. And they said, okay, it was just a blip. And then something happened 3 days later. It says just another blip. And then about 2 weeks later, the Justice Department said, hey, looks like you've got a malware attack. It's like, oh, those were the blips. How about that? And so Target was basically going to do its due diligence and try to figure out what was going on. But then they were kind of put in a position where they didn't want to be. Okay, so Christopher, I'm going to ask you a question, which is probably unfair, but who's Brian Krebs? No. So his name was thrown in there. So basically on December 15th, Target was saying, all right, this is our day one. This is where we're going to start moving forward. And we're going to gather all the information necessary so we can alert our customers, which probably was going to take a little bit of time to do that. Well, then December 18th, somebody came along, a security expert and a blogger named Brian Krebs, said, hey, you guys, you probably should be aware that the Justice Department has told Target that the information may have secure. There may be a massive data breach. Then Target a day later says, okay, there's been a data breach. All right. So probably not the way Target wanted to do this. Probably they wanted to gather all the information they could before they made an official announcement, which that's going to be kind of an interesting question about what the timing was and the nature of that. Okay. But yeah, Brian Krebs has kind of forced their hand, basically said, yeah, you guys don't know, but Target's taken all, or the Target data breach and all your credit card information is now accessible, and you guys are just screwed. Yeah, so that was kind of, he said it in obviously more eloquent terms than I did. But yeah, that was kind of, and the reason I bring up his name is his name actually came up in a lot of data breaches. He was the one who actually advised on or notified on the Home Depot data breach that occurred about a year later. And so he basically is kind of the forefront of what these data breaches right around that time. And there were a lot of them. If you go to Wikipedia, you can actually see there's a list of data breaches that occurred in the United States for really large organizations. Right around that 2013, 2014 timeframe, that's when that became increasingly common. And so we're going to talk about the nature of that, because that should have been kind of a big alert since that happens so consistently. But yeah, Target was notified about the data breach, or they were notified about the data breach in the Justice Department. They were trying to basically gather what information they could to figure out the scope of it. They hired Verizon to do the work, but their hand was forced when Brian Krebs published on his blog, and everybody's like, hey, what's going on, Target? Target had to issue a statement saying, we don't know the scope of this, but yeah, we believe there may be a problem. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Verizon team when they came in, what they did, and also kind of some of their observations about Target's internal security. But let's go ahead, let's look at the questions themselves. So again, a little bit unfair for me to put you on the spot, but again, I was very impressed with what you guys knew from this. You know, it's obviously that you read the case in detail and you took diligent notes. So well done on that. So good. I expect no less in the future. All right. So this case indicates that Target's investigation not begin until after the contact from the U.S. Department of Justice. Was Target negligent in not proactively investigating the initial incident on November 30th, 2013, or the second incident on December 2nd, 2013? So Jacob, we're going to go back to you for this question. What does your group think about this particular situation?
So we do believe that Target was negligent.
Okay, what's your reasoning?
So in regards to the second incident, Target may not have been able to stop the breach if they had responded earlier, because of the malicious activity had already occurred in the first incident. But if controls were in place to notify security personnel of the alarms, Target should have acted in a response to the alarms when they were raised.
Okay. So this one's a really challenging question. It's probably the most is one of the more difficult perspectives to take. I think the natural answer is yes. Obviously, we know what the results were, so it appears they were negligent. But let's go ahead and go back to where we're at November 30th. All right. And you don't know of any data breach activity that's occurring right now, and you see something like this come up. Is it a possibility that there's a data breach? Absolutely. And we know, in fact, that was what happened. But if you're a security expert who's working for Target, and you see just kind of this minor arbitrary thing pop up, is that something you want to spend a whole lot of time and effort investigating? If you aren't certain what the case is, saying maybe we want to wait and see if it happens again. If that's the case, maybe we need to investigate further. Now, the second one who came up, a very similar incident, that would cause me a little bit of concern. I'd be saying, after the first one, we don't know what it is. We're going to wait and see if it happens again. If it happens again, then we'd probably say, all right, something is happening here. We're starting to see a repeating pattern. So I think that may have been the argument for why they were negligent. But keep in mind that we have the benefit of hindsight. We can look back and say, Target was definitely negligent because look at the results. Can we say that they were negligent if we don't know what the results are? The answer is we don't know. We don't have enough detail about what their activities were and whether it was reasonable for us to approach that. So I think that the answer could be argued both ways, and it's very natural for us in hindsight to argue that they were negligent, especially after the second incident. I think that probably should have been a little bit more of a clarion call for them to figure out what's going on. But yeah, I agree. It is kind of a depiction saying, based on what happened, yeah, we were pretty certain that that's the case. All right, so moving on from that, Target did not report on the data breach until nearly 3 weeks after the first detection of suspicious activities. Should organizations that are responsible for confidential client information have a responsibility to disclose cybersecurity incidents in a timely manner? All right, this is a pretty obvious question. Just as a class, what do you guys think? Yes or no? It's obvious, yes. Okay, obvious, yes. Now, the question that I'm going to bring up is a little bit more challenging. All right. What are some arguments to support timely disclosure? And this would basically mean once we're aware of the data breach, we should disclose it immediately. That's kind of what I was going for. So, Jackson, what were some arguments for that your group came up with?
We said that so the customers are aware and they can monitor their bank accounts if there's any suspicious activity.
Okay. So that would be an example of one. So we have responsibility to the stakeholders in the organization. In this case, we're specifically concerned about the customers because it's their information that's being it's being exposed. Are there any other stakeholders who might be that we might be concerned about in this area? Not a question exclusive over Jackson, but what do you guys think? This is primarily on customers, but can we be concerned about other stakeholders as well? I mean, long term, absolutely, because we note that Target had some pretty massive costs associated with this breach. Do shareholders would like it when we have excessive costs in an area that could have been prevented? Probably not, but we'll talk about that in just a bit. Also, what is one of the fundamental criteria that we want with respect to accounting? We talked about it in respect to accounting. So remember, we talked about this in 417. We talked about how people inside the organization have more information than people outside of the organization, and the whole goal is to try to make the information that's not immediately available, make it more accessible. What is that concept called? Starts with the letter T. Fundamental concept in accounting. You know, we want the information to be more transparent. Yes, transparency is what we're going for. So transparency is pretty important in this regard. If it looks like that we're not disclosing information in a timely manner, there's a lack of that. So that would be one of those ideas. This goes back to something Jacob talked about. So November 30th, there's a blip. We say, all right, we'll monitor and see if there's any problem. December 2nd, probably should have followed up on that. Can we argue that the delay created an increase or an intensity and increase in the problems that could have been that existed? Like by not investigating that on the second incident, that nearly I guess 2 weeks later, December 15th, when it was finally notified to the Justice Department, that the problem escalated pretty substantially from that point. Yeah, so if we acted sooner, we may have actually mitigated some of the problems that we were exposed to. This is also interesting because the TJX case also occurred right around December. We said this is one of those things that they probably do not want to have exposed right before the Christmas holidays. And apparently they suffered pretty substantially as a result of the exposure right around that time. All right, so those are some arguments for. What about arguments against timeless disclosure? So this is arguing that we do not want to actually have or present the information until we have enough detail to be able to act upon. All right. So let's go ahead and go to Derek. What would your group argue for this point?
We said that Target may wanted to wait to have enough information to make it an informed disclosure, because if they disclosed too early and it wasn't as serious of an incident, then their reputation would have been damaged for
That kind of encompassed all three of my answers. That one, the ones I sent to say. So let's talk about first of all right, why do we wait? Well, it's the same reason why we didn't act upon the first incident, as we want to make sure there's actually a problem. All right. So it's a little bit like when I'm driving down the road and I hear something funny in my car and I'm just kind of like, oh my gosh, I've blown out a tire. I better turn off the side of the road and change my tires. All of them. All right. That's not how I react. I get a little bit nervous, but if nothing happens, then I'm fine. Okay. It's only when the tires started deflating, I'm just kind of like, okay, now there's a problem. So want to make sure there's actually a problem. That's probably the first thing we want to do in this case. Once we know that there's a problem, we would like to know the scope of the problem. As Derek said, we would like to provide full disclosure on that. The full detail of the disclosure is really important, because if we say we know there's a problem, we don't know the entire scope of that problem, that creates issues. And the reputational issue, not aside, full disclosure is really important for people to make informed decisions. Now, I do want to talk about that last statement, the reputational concern. All right, so let's say that we have this situation. I think this is kind of the same situation the Target encountered because they did not have all the information they wanted. They wanted to actually do a little bit more work. They started on December 15th, and I think they probably would have waited till after Christmas to disclose if they could have, because they were trying to gather a whole bunch of information. Their hand was forced because the blogger said, hey, there's a problem. The Target said, yeah, there's a problem. We don't know what the scale of that problem is. Now put yourself in a Target stakeholder situation. You hear that from an entity that you've got some sort of business with, whether that be you're a customer or whether that be you're some other stakeholder. How does that make you feel when somebody says there's a problem? We don't know the extent of the problem. Yes, okay. So in financial research, they call this signaling theory. And the idea behind signaling theory is that if you share incomplete information, people will automatically fill in the gaps, and they will use the worst case scenario to fill in the gaps. All right. So that was one of those things that was really prevalent here, is that they would like to wait so they could say, let us give you the full details of what happened here. In order to do that, so that you don't automatically assume that the world is coming to an end as a result of this. And so that was one of the problems with having that early disclaimer say, yeah, we know there's a problem. We're not sure about what the scope of it is. People are going to say, oh my gosh, I'm never shopping at Target again. And I think that a lot of people probably said that because their revenues were definitely hit as a result of that. So yeah, some arguments I think that are very strong in both directions. You could say they need to be able to share some information, but not being able to share the full detail of information could be very harmful. Could create a lot of problems. All right, moving forward. Case indicates the data breach was originated with one of Target's vendors and access to Target systems. All right. So I believe that I picked on Derek for that one. Is talking about the company Fazio Mechanical Services. And they were a company that basically provided, I'm trying to remember where that was in there. They gave some very specific information about this particular company. So I wanted to see if I can try to find it. So they're third-party service provider, they supply refrigeration devices and services. They actually, Target provided access for them so they could handle electronic billing, contract submission, and project management. However, they did not perform remote monitoring control of heating, cooling, and refrigeration for systems of Target, which is good because cybersecurity has told us if that's the case, then cyber attackers would have hacked into Target and started messing with the temperature in Target stores. And then nobody would shop there ever again. All right. So they actually had access to the financial systems, but not necessarily the building systems, which that's a small comfort, I guess. But anyway, so Fazio was trying to make this claim, say, yeah, we have done everything we're supposed to do. We basically they had really high level systems. So they state their IT system and security measures are in full compliance with industry best practices. And by the way, I tried to actually edit this case so that I took out all of the quotes and all of the citations. I failed. I actually left one citation in, I think, and that was the Fazio Mechanical Service. Maybe I actually took it out for your version. But this is an abridged case. I took out all the citations and took out all the extraneous information so that you guys only had to read 10 pages rather than the 30 pages that your case still was. You know, which maybe I should have left the 30 pages in because you were so ravenous for the content that yeah, you're so excited about it. Anyway, despite a claim that Fazio was in compliance with industry best practices, it had been alleged that Fazio relied on the free, non-commercial version of malware anti-malware software, Malwarebytes anti-malware software, which does not provide real-time protection. Okay, has anybody ever used Malwarebytes here? So the free version is really nice, and it actually is good to scan for malware. I would recommend that if you think your computer is running a little bit slow or you're a little bit suspicious about some activity on the computer, download the free version. All right. Now, I'm talking to you guys as individual users, people who are using your computer for a small array of activities, definitely not operating a multi-million-dollar company. All right. There's a difference there between using the free version just to scan a small laptop or a small desktop computer for malware that might be on the computer. It says, oh, I visited this website and they put up a tracking bug that I don't want them to have. Delete, all right? Versus this company right here that probably need to monitor all the activity that was going on. And so they're using a free version, even though they should be monitoring what's going on predictably in real time. And so since they didn't have the real-time monitoring, somebody slipped a bug on there, and then that bug got into the target systems. So the question then moves on, says, how does the revelation relate to our discussion of system organization controls reporting from 2 weeks ago? Savannah, what did your group say on this one?
So we said that SOC reports can aid in verifying that controls are being used and are effective in a third-party organization. Since one of Target's vendors had access to Target's systems, there was a control failure in place. A SOC 2 report would be helpful in determining whether the controls over security, availability, and processing integrity of confidential information are operating effectively within an organization, and in this case, they were not.
So SOC reporting was not nearly as prevalent when we talk about this going back 9 years ago, I guess maybe 10 years ago. I think it was late 2013, 10 years ago. It still existed. We don't know have any information on what type of SOC reporting was used in this incident. It sure sounds like that we're talking about a SOC 1 report, given that there was just some assertions made about, even if there, if any report at all, there could have been no SOC reporting done for this particular vendor, given that their scope was so limited. But if it was probably very, very minuscule. If we'd gone into a little bit more detail, the auditors who were performing the SOC analysis, who maybe looked at the both design and operating effectiveness, might have found, so you're using malware bytes, but you're using the free version as opposed to the paid one, which would actually monitor your malware in real time. Have you considered about upgrading? It says, well, there's a cost with that. It says, yes, there's a cost with not having it as well. All right, which is a very interesting dilemma that we're going to run into here in just a second. In addition to the aforementioned issue of Target's vendor, the investigation team noted rampant issues in Target Express. I love that word, rampant. Okay. So we've got a bunch of issues. We've got a whole bunch of issues in this particular situation. So let's go ahead and make sure we get all of them. All right. So we're going to go ahead and start with Christopher. What did your group identify here?
There's no major obstacles that by network inside internal target network. There's lack of segmentation that allowed them to reach the point of sale. Network segmentation that reached the point of sale terminal. We also have weak passwords, so when they stole credentials from the target systems during the Fazio breach, that could figure out the passwords, see other stuff. The misconfigured services, such as several Microsoft SQL servers that have weak administrator password, and Apache Tomcat servers using the default administrator passwords. And the last issue we found was the maintenance and patching of systems. So they're missing critical patches for Microsoft, and we're running outdated web servers for IBM, WebSphere, PHP, and Apache.
Okay, that's good. So let's talk about those three. I think there was one more that we can talk about, but I think that was a pretty good overall analysis. So one of the big ones was, says in the case specifically, there were no major obstacles to accessing the point of sale terminals across the entire network once inside the internal target network. Now, I apologize. It occurs to me that I lied about what was going on here. I was talking about how the breach occurred through a deli scale. That was actually Verizon who did that. Their auditors, they went to a deli scale in one store, and then were actually able to access a point of sale terminal in another store, which that should not be able to happen, okay? That should not be able to happen. So that's a big concern with respect to that. So once the hackers had access to one point, they could access multiple other points, which certainly is going to be a concern in any entity. But this seemed to be a pretty straightforward one. The point of sale access, if the hackers got access to one point, they could access the entire target network, which they did, okay? They did it remotely, but Verizon said even if it was remote, they have the ability to do it from one store and gather access information to other stores as well. All right. One of the ones that we've talked about a lot in this course, and it should have seen by now that people have learned their lesson, and I will guarantee you that there are organizations out there that are still weak in this area. What is it? It's passwords, all right? What percentage of passwords were able to be compromised by the Verizon security team? Did anybody catch that number? It was a large percentage. 86% of the passwords were eventually cracked, okay? And so what does this mean? It means there probably were not dynamic passwords. Whenever you have to reset your password, I just reset my password on the Truman network. So those of you who had cracked my account, too bad, all right? But yeah, I just reset my password on the Truman or the TrueView network. And so one of the things they tell you on there is they have some very specific protocols. It has to be at least 8 characters. You have to use 3 of 4, I think, criteria. You have to use uppercase, they have to use lowercase, you have to use numbers, and you have to use symbols, which, by the way, I use multiples of all. So good luck, folks. All right. So yeah, and you would like to kind of make sure that it's actually something that's not easily traceable. In fact, there's a password strength indicator online. I don't know if anybody's ever gone to that. I probably should have had it available for this. But you can find out based on the characteristics of your password, how long it would take a hacker to hack in. And if it's just 5 characters, 1 word, all lowercase, it literally takes less than a second for a computer system to be able to hack that. Okay. So the dynamic ones tend to be much longer than 8 characters, and they have to use multiple different characteristics. And so, yeah, I know that Dr. Caden takes this seriously, because every time I see her log password, it's like she's writing a novel, you know. But I'm not quite as detailed in that, but I do use all the different all the different characteristics there, so note that. But passwords are a really easy point of entry if they're weak, and we've already seen some examples of that in previous situations in this course. Remember, we were talking about the new cooperative during cybersecurity last week, and I said they didn't change from their default password, which was chicken 1. All right. You don't even need a complex hacking tool to be able to figure that out. If you worked there and knew the default password was chicken 1 and the people were not changing their passwords, you probably just could arbitrarily find somebody's login and say, I bet there's a 50% chance that I could put chicken 1 in there and get access. Just kind of silly. And that's far more recent than the target data breach. That was 2021 that occurred. So there were some issues and not changes from the default passwords, and the ones that were changed, they were very easy to crack. I think they said crack over 500,000 of the passwords in the organization. All right. Next one that Christopher identified was a lack of regular maintenance and patching. So this is something that we see a lot here locally with our organization, particularly those of us who actually have computers issued by Truman, is we have massive amounts of patching that goes on at Truman State. For as much as I give grief about the Truman IT, about the cybersecurity threat, they responded beautifully. They did a really good job. They notified what the problem was. That's why we have the dual factor authentication now, which is great. Their system computers are slow because we're dealing with older technology, but it's going to be a very, very difficult challenge for cyber attacks to occur in the future. Usually when we talk about cyber attacks, it's not because the systems themselves are bad, it's because somebody's not following proper protocols. That's not following the controls that are in place, which I want to say that in the business program is probably not a problem because we need our computers for all that. But some of the other disciplines are like computer, I can take it or leave it. They probably are not as concerned about making sure they follow the proper protocols. For other organizations, maybe not so much. There's definitely a trade-off there. We already saw that with the vendor, but apparently Target was guilty of that as well. They had the top of the line systems, but they were not updating the software as frequently as they need to be. Now, again, this is not like many ages ago. We're talking about this was just 10 years ago. We did have systems at the time could automatically update. But if you're like me, I get really frustrated when an update runs on my computer during work hours. I mean, yesterday it was happening and I was swearing. I was so mad. Okay. Because I was trying to do a Zoom call at the same time and my computer was just literally freezing. And then I tried to unmute and the unmute would take like 30 seconds. So yeah, I can get that under frustration for that. But turning off the updates, that's where you run into situations like this. We have administrators that control stuff like that at Truman State, but it sure sounds like that was not the case here at Target, that we didn't have administrative control over these privileges. There was one more that was kind of mentioned in there that was actually extremely relevant to kind of the scope and the landscape of what happened in this area. So what was said about the credit cards? So was there encryption of the credit cards? There was encryption on the delivery of the credit card information to headquarters, but there was not encryption on the terminals themselves. So a customer paid for something, it was basically that credit card number was downloaded and held on that terminal until it was delivered for payments later on in the day. Which means if somebody had access to that point of sale terminal, they could actually download the information that was on the terminal itself. So encryption was occurring, but only after the fact. When it was being held on the terminals themselves, that were free reign for anybody who had access to the terminal information. This led to a massive change that you all have seen the effects of very recently. So one of the things that they started talking about is using chip readers, and Target was one of the first major retailers to do that. We've started doing that now that it becomes commonplace, but if you think about this, this has probably occurred in the time that you all started using credit cards. Does anybody remember having a credit card pre-chip? I do. I remember it was like when I got a chip, I said, what the heck is this thing? And then I found out about it. So basically the chip actually encrypts the transaction. It creates a PIN number, an automatic PIN number that you don't need to know about. But it creates it on the terminal and it leaves it encrypted until the transaction is communicated. So anybody who accesses the terminal itself will see your number, but it's an encrypted number, which they have to have a specific protocol to be able to to be able to unlock. And it's very, very hard to get that. It's very, very detailed, and it changes constantly. That's what the chip is doing. It's actually sending a message whenever it communicates to the credit card company and saying, all right, I'm doing this transaction. What is the encryption? It actually provides encryption key to the transaction itself. I'm simplifying the process pretty significantly. It's far more complex than that, but that's basically what it's saying. It's like, all right, we know we communicate to both the retailer and to the credit card company what that encryption key is, and that has to be used to unlock the credit card number. It's not going to be communicated to any other parties. So is it still able to be unlocked? Yes. It's far, far more challenging to hack into something like that, which is why this is being used pretty regularly in most organizations now. In fact, I'd say most businesses that I work with here in Kirksville have actually updated to chip readers. The only ones that probably don't have chip readers are the smaller companies that still use tools like iPad add-ons to like swipe the credit card. Yeah. I'm gonna have to get on GSP and say that update. President Bryce, let's talk about that, okay? Credit card readers need to be up to the chip readers. I want that done before you graduate. All right. All right. So yeah, that was one of the big ones as well. Now, question number 7 is a very interesting one from our perspective, all right? Case notes that Target incurred substantial costs, both quantifiable and non-quantifiable as a result of the breach. What does this observation indicate about the relative benefits of a strong cybersecurity infrastructure, preventative versus remediation of cybersecurity incidents, which are detective and corrective? So I'm going to call upon, we're going to back to Jacob on this one. What's your group say on this one?
So we said the relative benefit of strong cybersecurity infrastructure and preventive costs to make sure that the company can prevent security breaches before they make a breach. Preventative measure that they could have done and which they implemented after was do like rapid detection and response at like some center, and they made a cyber fusion center for that. The relative benefit of cybersecurity in detective and corrective costs, in detecting the security breach and correcting what has happened with the security breach.
Good. So they provided a lot of information in the case about the corrective costs, the detective and corrective costs. They actually were able to quantify that pretty substantially, pretty easily, and it was a lot of money. Now, do we think, just a consensus in the class, do we think that if Target had been a little bit more proactive with their vendor and with their own infrastructure, that the preventative costs would have been less than these corrective costs? Yes, we do. The problem being is we do not know what that number is. All right. So let's just use a very simple scenario, all right? And so I know many of you are taking a business analytics class and you apparently just had an exam on it, okay? So I want to use a hypothetical scenario. We're going to just use 4 different students in the class. I'm not going to talk about names, we're just talking about. So one student was really insistent they needed to do well in this exam and studied for like 20 hours for the exam, all right? Another student was just as insistent, but they studied for 10 hours, all right? Another student, not nearly as insistent, studied for like 3, and then one student did study at all. All right. Now we look at that and we're kind of trying to say, all right, obviously there's going to be a hierarchy there. We think that probably the students that studied more did well. But the question is, what is the cost-benefit trade-off? Does anybody just really look forward to studying for exams and just say, I would really want to spend 20 hours studying for exams? This is great. Does anybody take that attitude? If so, you're in the right area. But I don't think that's the process that we approach. So the question is what is the amount that we want to study to achieve a result? And if I say study for 20 hours, study for 10 hours, study for 5 hours, you probably have very strong opinions about that. You say that's too much or that's not enough. And it's going to be different from different people in this classroom. Studying 0, I think we can say that's probably not the case. But let's assume that I say all 4 people got the exact same score in the exam. What does that change your perspective? Does that change your perspective on everything? It's like, well, Dr. Osha's giving way too hard of an exam. If that's the case, yeah, that's probably where you're at right there, if that's the case. But I don't really give you the number. I just say they achieved the same result. You probably say then the people who studied, they paid a cost that was really unnecessary. And that's the problem with these costs, is that we can't actually really quantify the cost. We can't say what was the right amount to study. In this case, we can say it was 0. In a situation like this, do we know what the proper amount of costs that should have been paid are for preventative measures? They're not quantifiable. We can't quantify saying this is the right amount that you achieve the benefit that exceeds the cost. Could they have prevented all cybersecurity incidences? Theoretically, yes. They could have spent all of their extra income on this and say, we are never getting a cyber attack ever again. Is it reasonable to do that? No, that's the cost benefit analysis that we've talked about before in this course, that we don't want the benefit or the cost of something to exceed the benefit that it provides. So that's the problem we run into, is that if you go into an organization and say, we're going to put in preventive controls and it's going to cost this much, then you have to say, all right, what is the benefit that we're getting out of it? And that benefit is hard to quantify. It's hard to determine. You could say, I studied for 20 hours. I got this grade. I'm happy with that. Then somebody said, well, I only studied for 10 hours. I got the exact same grade. You're going to feel like you studied 10 hours too much. Or if you go to the person who didn't study at all, you're going to be like, I hate you. All right. So that's kind of where you're at. Now gaining knowledge is its own reward. That's where you should be thinking. Okay. It's like that 20 hours, you became a better person because of it. All right. So just think about it that way, and it's a little bit easier to swallow. All right. In the lessons learned section, case notes that this incident forced Target to reevaluate its existing infrastructure and update systems and process accordingly. Based on the improvements of Target and other retailers that have been that have taken this incident as object lesson, can it be argued the data breach resulted in a net positive benefit? So I'm going to break this question into two parts. All right. Let's evaluate. Was it a net positive benefit for Target? Jackson, what's your group say?
We did say that it was a net positive benefit because they made these IT infrastructure improvements, saying that if they have all these improvements now, that if they had a data breach down the line, that they're well prepared for it now. And that they also have these disaster recovery and business continuity plans in place that they were able to successfully resolve the issue before it became a bigger issue.
So we note that even though Target suffered as a result of this, and it was pretty substantial, there were definitely quantifiable and non-quantifiable costs. Like we can say the direct costs, the costs that they had to put into this, they actually monitored those in the case. They also said that they lost revenues as a result. I think they said that their net income was down 1%. Their revenues were down 1%. Their net income was down like 34%, which those are also costs as well. Those are indirect costs because that would be the cost from the data breach occurring in the first place. So even though we say that it may take time to recoup those costs, it's going to be a net benefit in the future because they're going to have a paradigm to operate from for the future. They're going to have stronger security, and they're going to know what the risks are, and they're going to identify those more effectively. So that would be one approach we could take this question. I think that's a reasonable approach. But there's a reason I actually put in parentheses and other retailers that have taken this incident as an object lesson, because I want you to think about the greater consensus. If we assume that any organization is subject to this particular type of incident, shouldn't they have looked at this and said, we better get on the bandwagon and we better start answering this question now? Did they? What do you guys think as a whole? So didn't we talk about this with TJX? We said it was human nature to wait until there's a problem to address it. Can we say that a lot of organizations did that? We already know of one because we know exactly 1 year later, not exactly, but roughly 1 year later. I don't know why I said exactly. It means the opposite of roughly. All right. So roughly 1 year later, Home Depot had a similar data breach. And their data breach, I think, was like 57 million credit cards were accessed in that situation. Could they have learned from Target's situation? Should they have learned from Target's situation? Yes, and yet almost identical circumstance. And interestingly enough, Brian Krebs is the one who brought it to light, so that name comes up again. All right, so that's an example. Should other types of organizations have also learned from this? Not even just retail organizations. I'm not going to pick on just the retail companies. There were a lot of them that have suffered data breaches. Almost every major retailer has suffered data breaches to some degree. I think Walmart's had one recently. I don't know about Menards. I think they're small enough to stay out of the business. Office Depot maybe. Lowe's had one. So a lot of these organizations suffered for that. They may not have been the same scale and scope, but they still had problems with it. So we can say that the retail industry definitely didn't learn its lesson. But could other organizations in other environments have learned from this? So I'm just going to throw out a few names here. Where are those names? Could Facebook have learned from this? Facebook 2019 suffered a massive data breach. Okay. All right. So some of you may not be in Facebook, so that's so passe, Dr. Barnes. I just do all my communication through LinkedIn. I know many of you are LinkedIn. I've got connections with you on LinkedIn. Did LinkedIn suffer a data breach? Yeah, I think it was 2018. My dates are maybe wrong on this. I'm trying to remember what they are. So LinkedIn had a similar data breach. All right. So You know, even if you were like, okay, I only do professional social networking, too bad. Some of your information may have been compromised that as well. The good news is before, up until recently, I didn't even update my information on LinkedIn. So they got bad information for me. So yeah. And then if we're talking about retailers, what about online retailers? Amazon? Amazon had a data breach. It was a pretty small one by scale, but it's still a data breach. A much bigger one was a group called Alibaba. Have you guys heard of that one before? I think they're a Chinese-based marketing retailer, and they had a massive, I think it was the largest data breach in history. I can't remember the numbers for it, but it was ridiculous. And that was 2021, I believe. So could these organizations have learned from Target and been a little bit more proactive? Yes. Would that have stopped data breaches altogether? No. But given the size and scope of some of these data breaches that we've seen, I think we can conclude that organizations don't really take this as seriously as they should. And probably the more concerning thing is that these have evolved. Because we're talking about data breaches here. What's kind of the new face of cybersecurity attacks that we've talked about last week? Ransomware attacks? Yeah. So now imagine not only that you're getting money for profit, but you have the ability to lock down the information so people can't use it. All right. We didn't even talk about it, but that one of the things that we talked about with respect to cybersecurity, one of the new ones on the horizon, and this is particularly scary, is a concept called killware. This is not even information being held for ransom. This is the information being locked down that is a necessity for people to survive, or manipulating information that's actually going to be hazardous. There was a killware attack back in 2021 where a disgruntled employee at a water treatment facility got access to the system and started adding chemicals to that to the water treatment that would have basically killed people had it gone out. Now, fortunately, somebody was on the ball there and said, "Oh, this should not be happening. We need to fix this problem immediately." And they were able to track it down. But think about it. What if you have retailers out there, or not retailers, attackers out there who are not interested in benefiting off of this information? All they want to do is create chaos, or they want to do some harm to a former employer that's caused them grief. We talk a lot about the types of attacks that occur very visibly and publicly. We don't talk about the ones like this that could actually be very, very far more devastating if not left checked. Like imagine somebody did a killware attack on a hospital. That is frightening. Right now we're at ransomware attacks, which is already frightening enough. But if you had somebody who said, "I don't want any money, I just want to see the world burn," and you know, I apologize for using the Dark Knight reference, but that's legitimately what's happening in that situation. So some real concerns there that we should probably be taking a lot more seriously than we are right now, and yet I don't think organizations really understand the face of this. Anyway, sorry to leave you on a down note. I promise it will be better on Friday because we'll be doing Ultrix. So I'll see you guys there. Oh, and we'll also have a quiz, which is obviously great. Yeah.
All right.